Hey, good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to your weekend edition of the news and everything local and national. This is the Pat Miller Program. As always, very glad you're with us. Let me start off by just saying we were out on a remote the other day. We were out at Good Feet, a great store. In fact, I've still got Good Feet slip-ins in my shoes that I wear. Been wearing them now for 5+ years, and they help a great deal. But that aside, let me just say, a number of people came out to Good Feet just to say hi, just to say hello, to view the Joey Logano race car that was out front there from NASCAR. Beautiful car, by the way. But a lot of people came in, and there were a ton of people that came in and talked about how they listened to our program every day back when we were on daily, and they continue to listen every Saturday. Remember, you can do that too. If you can't always listen to us live from noon to 2 on Saturdays, remember, you can always catch us on the podcast. Just go to wowo.com, click on the Pat Miller Program, and then you'll see all of our podcasts show up. The podcast is basically each hour of the Pat Miller Program since we've done it this way starting back in February. So you can find it. The most recent program and the most recent set is always first. So if you go to the podcast later today or anytime, if you go to today's date, this hour number 1, will be the first to pop up, okay? And it's that way, and you can always listen. So glad you're here. Remember, you can write me. You can write me at patmiller@wowo.com. Pat Miller, all one word, no dots or dashes, at wowo.com. And also you can text at 260-447-1190. That's 260-447-1190. So text or email, and we're here. So let's get into it, shall we? The 2024 presidential election race has been up and down, sideways, exciting, scary at times, but it has been a wild ride. All the way from the attempted assassination of Donald Trump to this recent shakeup of the Democrat ticket. Americans are left with their heads spinning. And there a lot of people, I get the sense, who are you voting for? I'm going to wait to see what happens next. On top of all this, all the surprises, the chaos, there's one certainty that's looming over the Trump campaign. He is not winning over Kamala Harris in the same way that he was over Joe Biden. He's not winning bigly, as Trump might say, over Kamala Harris. Some polls are now suggesting he might be losing by a couple of points. Yeah, losing to Kamala Harris. But don't freak out and don't, grab your hair like it's on fire and run for the door. Here's the thing. The one who doesn't have a record to run on, the one who admits she hasn't been the southern border, hadn't even been there, or to Europe, the one who was a laughingstock even to Democrat circles just a few weeks ago, she's the presidential candidate. And she's the presidential candidate now who sits down for an interview or to give a press conference. Then again, if you can beat your opponent by not saying a word, for Kamala Harris, that might be a strategy worth hanging on to. I mean, it might be. I mean, she was a laughingstock even to other Democrats. When people were saying Joe Biden, and then they're like, but we can't let Joe Biden go because then we go right to Kamala. Now, they might have been thinking in filling out his presidential term he has now. In other words, if Joe Biden had not resigned the ticket, if Joe Biden had resigned the White House, she would have become the keeper of the Oval Office. True. But even many Democrats back then thought that if she did that and she went in and she became president for 5 or 6 months, she would not be the candidate on the ticket. It's almost like the Democrats feel like they didn't have time to look around to find somebody else. How could that be? Could you not know that it was coming? Even if Joe Biden didn't utter the words that I'm not going to run for office again, do you think some of them couldn't have a clear view that, he's not going to be able to run again? We can see that. Anybody with a brain can see that. Well, obviously some people with brains didn't see it. So again, if you can beat your opponent by not saying a word, it's a strategy worth keeping. Donald Trump has the opposite problem. Donald Trump, this is not a jab at Donald Trump. It's just the reality. He talks all the time. Donald Trump goes to rallies and can talk for hours. In an interview with Elon Musk, he talked forever. Frequent press conferences, his posts on X and Truth Social. He have all that. So sure, that's Trump. He likes to talk. He likes to enjoy being the center of attention. But voters are being swept away into this whirlwind of bold statements and accusations instead of a clear campaign message. Pat, what are you talking about? Make America great again is not a campaign message. It's a campaign slogan. Okay? If I want to say, make the country great again, what does that mean? Better jobs, bigger jobs, more opportunities, more war, less war, more taxes, less taxes. What does it mean? In the Wall Street Journal this week, Gerard Baker said, Mr. Trump does deserve credit, and some have said for showing up to meet the press, unlike his opponent. And in his case, facing brickbats from almost universally hostile crowds, unlike the softballs that will doubtedly be lofted Miss Harris' way when she eventually decides to grant them an audience. When he shows up, Trump attacks Harris, as he should, repeatedly says she's the worst vice president in history. Again, I get that. It's a great line. Just give me some specifics. And for some reason, he keeps boasting about crowd sizes and stolen elections. Mr. Trump, God love you, sir. Stolen elections, did they happen? Don't know if stolen happened. Did some election cheating happen? No doubt it did. But at some point, we have to drop that. We have to get beyond that. I am not going to win an election with you, Mr. Trump, based on the fact of what might have happened to you back in 2020. I need to vote for you because of what it is that you're presenting for me in 2024. The Hill magazine reports that the Republicans are divided on how to win the 2024 election. While former President Trump is focused on crowd sizes and allies are bashing Vice President Harris for not sitting down for media interviews, some Republicans, and this is going to be a dirty word to some of you, some Republicans, like former UN Ambassador Nikki Haley, assessed her party's leaders need to quit whining and focus on policy instead. Now, although she's not a favorite of the MAGA crowd, in this case, she's absolutely correct. Absolutely correct. I mean, other than the whole thing that he came out his pledge with no taxes on tips, there's nothing for voters to wrap their heads around. Trump has no specific ideas for resurrecting the economy unless he has them, but he's not sharing them. I haven't heard them. I would love to hear them. I know he's smart enough to have them. I know that he has a group of thinkers around him to have them, but he has not come out with anything just yet. No specifics for resurrecting an economy that's in shambles. No explanation on how to deal with the untold millions of illegal aliens in the country. He keeps talking about widespread crime, but we don't seem to have a policy to address it. How do you address it? And you say, well, you stop the aliens. Look, I get it. Stop the aliens, but that's not the sole source of all of our unstoppable widespread crime. It's beyond that. It is beyond that. And I'm not sure that the people that are around the president that are addressing him, that are giving him ideas, that are telling him what to do, I am not sure that answers the question. The people around Mr. Trump see a candidate knocked off his bearings. Nothing like the man who reclined very serenely on July the 15th there in the delegate hall for the Republican National Convention in that nice chair sitting up there in the side balcony and was just reveling in the importance that he was getting. Remember, when he was there, his opponent was still Joe Biden. It was not Kamala Harris. And then Mr. Trump had his ear bandaged, as he should. When they made fun of him, it was stupid. But basically, he was taking on the role of a living martyr. And I'm not saying that he should have. He should not have. He had an assassination attempt on him just 2 or 3 days before. Inside the Milwaukee arena with the Republicans that day, the Democrats had already been defeated. The only thing left to wonder was how big was the victory going to be for Donald Trump. That's not all they're thinking about anymore. They've now got some other things to think about. I'm not sure that they are. And for Republicans, that's going to be the difficulty, and that's going to be the problem. More coming up straight ahead. This is Pat Miller here with you on this Saturday here on WOWO 92.3 FM and 1190 AM. Hi, everybody. Welcome back. It is the Pat Miller Program. Very glad that you're with us, and we continue on through our Saturday sojourn. Again, in the New York Times, they said there was a time back on July the 15th at the Republican National Convention when Donald Trump was sitting on top of the world. As he sat there in that nice little cushy chair he had there from the sidelines looking at the RNC, he was sitting on top of the world. Inside the Milwaukee arena, the Democrats had already been defeated, everybody in the room. And in fact, at that point, everybody in the country, if you were to believe the pundits, everybody in the country was saying, well, it's no longer whether or not Trump's going to win, it's by how much. That's not what they're saying now. This is amazing to me. The very people in the press that had nothing good to say about Kamala Harris, and they didn't have a whole lot good to say about Joe Biden. When Joe Biden resigns the ticket and hands that over to Kamala Harris, the very people that were saying, they were saying she's the worst thing that could happen, they can't possibly, Joe Biden hands her the keys to the car, and the next thing you know, she's winning the 500. They fawn all over her, as to be expected, by the way. I mean, the CNNs, the NBCs, the ABCs, they are expected to fawn all over her. I mean, Donald Trump can't get reelected because Donald Trump, if I'm in the media, he was the last one that held me accountable. I don't want to be held accountable. I want to continue doing my thing. I want to do what I want to do. And if it's Kamala, then let's ride the Kamala horse. Let's go. The good news for Donald Trump, there is still time to turn this around. And it does need to be turned around because in national polls now, although within shooting range, he's trailing Kamala by 2 to 3 points. Now, I know there are 2 or 3 polls that say that Trump's still up by 2 and all that. I'm not being a defeatist. I'm being an alarmist. I'm saying we need to jump on the track and get Donald Trump back on the track. There is still time to turn this around. But he needs to elevate his rhetoric and he needs to stick to the issues instead of focusing only on what Harris and Biden have done wrong. He needs to explain his policies while giving the Americans and the American people a positive, hopeful vision for what the country can be. He needs to grab America again by the horns and say, okay, guys, pull this back together. Stop stop falling for the mirrors and the secret cards up the sleeve and all that. Follow what's true. What is true about Kamala Harris? She is a horrible vice president, and she has horrible ideas. She had to jump out of the Iowa caucuses before they even began, even though she had already spent millions for her campaign. But what has she done as vice president? Virtually nothing. The only title that she is known for and for which the president gave her the free rein was being the Southern Border Czar, even though the media went nuts. Well, she was never called the Southern Czar. 2 weeks ago, I played on this program all kinds of times where people said, oh, she's the czar. She's the border czar. She's in charge of the border. I mean, we had like 20 of them. And then those same people are saying, well, she was never really officially the border czar. Look, if the president says you're the border czar, it's official. You don't have to take it to the Congress and they've got to vote and go, yes, that's right, we approve. She is the border czar. It is not actually an office, but it is a calling, it is a policy, it is a burden that was laid on her by the President of the United States, one that she never took up. She never took it up. I think what President Trump needs to do is he needs to grab onto a vision for what the country can be, and he needs to mirror Ronald Reagan's very famous speech where he talked about us as a shining city on a hill. We are the shining city on the hill. Now, let's flip a little bit to the positive, because I do think that Donald Trump is getting a little bit of this message about switching course. At a rally in North Carolina this week and a press conference he did in New Jersey, Donald Trump clearly and specifically outlined his positions on a range of very important issues. He was focused, he was disciplined, and that too is a very clear shift in strategy. And he just rehired Corey Lewandowski. That was his campaign manager back in 2016. All of this is coming just in time. Despite the media's fawning media coverage of Harris, Trump remains within the margin of error in most polls. And in the Rasmussen poll and in the Fox News poll, Trump leads Harris in the national race. But that's in Rasmussen and that's in Fox. Now, when somebody says they're leading in the national race by 2 or 3%, that doesn't mean a whole lot to me. When Kamala Harris says, I'm winning it, by 3%. Okay, what percentage of those are from California, which has a very large population, New York, which has a very large population, Illinois, which has a horribly leftist position, the state of Washington, and the state of Oregon. If those polls relied heavily on those types of areas, she could be leading by 5 or 6 polls, but that doesn't mean she's winning the Electoral College. If you win California by 2 percentage points, you get their electoral numbers. If you win by 22, that's impressive, but all you get is their electoral numbers. We need to be looking to the electors as well as we look at the national poll. At the very least, the reports of the demise of Trump's standing in the race are greatly exaggerated. Hot Air said in their So Far reports, he has time to retool the messaging to hit Harris more effectively, and she'll have to expose herself at some point to the same kind of exposure that caused her favorable numbers to crater in mid-2021. 2021, yeah, that's when she had to drop out. You remember? She was one of the 12 or whatever numbers there were when they first started debating in Iowa. She was the one that literally called Joe Biden a racist. She talked about how he hated kids on the school buses. And then she went to great lengths and said, I was that girl on that school bus. I'm not sure that she ever had to ride a school bus at any point in her life, but there you go. Coming up a little bit later in the program, we're going to have Philip Wegman from Real Clear Politics on, and we will have him on, and he will be with us. And I want to talk to him about the currents of the campaign, and also if Joe Biden should resign, not just the ticket, but should Joe Biden now resign the office? I mean, can we grab this charade by the throat and call a halt to it? Can we do that? Look, it's easy to forget the fact that the President of the United States is an old guy named Joe Biden. He is a relic of the late 1980s political scene, a corruptocrat who affects a genial, folksy demeanor. He's an octogenarian so deep in the grips of dementia that his frequent mental lapses led him to end his campaign for re-election after a disastrous debate with the man he had tried to destroy in every way possible before a debate became unavoidable. And that man was Donald Trump. Now, although the whole world knows, or thinks it knows, that Biden abandoned his re-election bid because of his cognitive decline, he continues to pretend to be president. Now, even the New York Times is calling for a halt to the charade. I mean, there were several days this week when he had two calendar items on his schedule for the day as President of the United States. One day, I think it was Wednesday, he had 2 scheduled phone calls. And not to world leaders, by the way. Leader of this union and to these people here, to a group of teachers or whatever. And that was his day. The rest of his day was what? Sitting down having a White House prepared lunch and then maybe creme brulee for dessert. I mean, I don't know what he's doing. We know he's not doing much. The press is no longer clamoring for him. Come out and talk to us, Mr. President. Let us know what's going on. Come and sit down with us. No, they're too busy trying to get his replacement to come out and sit down with him, and she's not doing it either. She is copying Joe Biden's campaign from 4 years ago by doing everything that Joe Biden did, except he did it in a basement, and she's doing it behind a smokescreen. To talk to a very few reporters underneath the wing of your jet on the tarmac where you can't hear the questions, and after 2 or 3 softball questions you turn and you walk to the plane, that's not a press conference. That's a gaffe. That's slipping out. More coming up. Philip Wegman, straight ahead on this Saturday. Very glad that you're here. Here every Saturday from noon to 2, and we're going to be back with him. We're going to do that straight ahead right here on WOWO 92.3 FM and 1190 AM. Hi, everybody. Welcome back. Our thanks for Philip Wegman for being on with us today. Always appreciate Philip. Fox News contributor, nationally syndicated host Hugh Hewitt, who's a terrific mind, by the way, college professor, just a brilliant guy. He was on Special Report, and he was on there, and he said this about Vice President Kamala Harris, that she is trying a cloak of invisibility to get through a presidential race. That's a little bit about what I said to you about a half an hour ago. She's not hiding in her basement as Joe Biden did. She's hiding behind a smokescreen, a veiled curtain pulled between her and the press and her and you. Obviously, they've played many iterations on different topics, and there really hasn't been the opportunity to have this sit-down formal interview with Kamala Harris, or a press conference for that matter. And right now, we're somewhere around 26 days and counting. Hugh said, I really think she has read Harry Potter about the cloak of invisibility, and it worked for them, so she's putting on the cloak of invisibility. Yeah, when you talked to Congressman Goldman, who was from New York, Democrat, he said an astonishing thing. Kamala Harris has to, quote, decide where she wants to be. Now, that's a Democrat, but let me say this. Why does she need to decide that? The president is still giving her all of the pluses and all of the margins of victory right now. So why does she need to change her strategy? I don't know from their view that she does. Look, this is his excuse, this cloak of invisibility that Hugh Hewitt used when he was talking about her not appearing before any kind of live press event or giving any kind of in-depth interview. I think that's actually true. She's trying to figure out what she wants to say to win. And she has to say and then unsay everything that she said in 2019 and 2020. And she needs to unsay everything that she said back in 2020, especially on the border. She was the one back then that was so hawkish on the border. And then she faded from view. She dropped out of the Iowa caucus before the first caucus meeting even occurred. She dropped out. And then she was just laying on the sidelines, basically doing nothing, until Joe Biden snatched her out of obscurity and made her his vice presidential candidate. And I'll tell you, when he did that, my neck jerked so hard I almost gave myself a spinal injury. I mean, why would you pick her? Well, he wanted somebody that wouldn't threaten him, because Joe Biden, at the end of the day, all the way back when he used to give his towering Senate speeches, Joe Biden has always been someone who hid under the cloak of somebody else. That's kind of been his MO, and that's kind of been who he is. That's Joe Biden for you. Well, he's still hiding. Now she's trying to do the same thing, although she has to hide in public. She hides getting on and off of the 757, the vice presidential aircraft. I guess her greatest claim to the Oval Office is, I've not fallen on the airplane steps, not even once. But she's talking to nobody. She giggles people off. You know, she's not saying anything about anything. What are we? Here's where we need to revamp everything. Where do we need to retool who we are and what we believe about what's coming up relative to everything in the presidential campaign? What do you and I want to see in our next president? Because you have to start looking for it in the next presidential election and the next suitor in the Oval Office. More coming up right after the top of the news. Here's Pat Miller with you, and I'll be back with you straight ahead on WOWO 92.3 FM and 1190 AM. Hey, welcome back. Glad you guys are with us. Always glad to have you here. Nice to have the guys from the 122nd come out and spend some time with us and let us know what's going on out there with them, because that's also part of what is going on with us. I always appreciate the fact that they try to make the 122nd and WOWO listeners and everybody in Northeast Indiana all one congruous part of society. Shortly after Vice President Kamala Harris chose Governor Tim Walz of Minnesota as her running mate, the Trump-Vance campaign called into question some claims that he had previously made about his military service, opening this broadside against the U.S. Navy veteran that some Republicans now like in kind of a Swift Boat 2.0 attack. Swift Boat, of course, making reference back to what happened with John Kerry, who ran for the White House in 2004, in large part on his record as a junior naval officer in Vietnam. Those character attacks called into question whether Kerry really deserved his combat medals, notably 3 Purple Hearts, where he was awarded while he was commanding Swift boats in the Mekong Delta. For better or for worse, this line of criticism has now been rebooted for Walz in 2024. Big difference between John Kerry and Tim Walz. John Kerry, at least, was in Vietnam and made his presence known in Vietnam and did what he needed to do in Vietnam, although sometimes not very well and sometimes maybe not to the degree that he has tried to make known, but he was still there. When it came time for Tim Walz's group, over which he was commanding, to go and to make their presence known in the storm of the Middle East, to be there as part of the war in the sand, he didn't go. Almost the night before they were supposed to leave, he left his group. He resigned. And I've heard many, you've heard them, tons of people making claims and comments over the course of the last few days about how he did not present himself to be a great leader, at least not in their opinion. I think sometimes, you and I can bat about, I never served in the military. Many of you did, but a lot of you did not. It's not really my place to say he was a good soldier, not a good soldier. But every time I hear other people who served with him, there's not a whole lot good to say about Tim Walz as their commander, because he wasn't. And in fact, he never even showed up into the field of conflict. The group went in there without him. I don't think they thought a whole lot of him then. From everything that I'm hearing, not a whole lot of them have so much good to say about him now. Somebody else who has served us and did serve us in Afghanistan as a member of the armed forces, Jim Banks. He's running for the U.S. Senate. He's going to be on with us live on the Newsmaker line coming up straight ahead right after the bottom of the hour. Thanks for being with us here on this Saturday. Pat Miller right here with you on WOWO 92.3 FM and 1190 AM.
Podcasts by Federated Media.